With all the research that's coming out, it's becoming more and more apparent that the plural marriage doctrine was never of God and should be rescinded. My first video considered how this doctrine takes God's name in vain. My second video covered how data proves the lifestyle and the belief in eternal plural marriage is inherently harmful. This video will focus on three contradictions around these teachings that involve relationships, intimacy, sin, and how I believe this relates to women. As a disclosure, I don't know the meaning of a lot of things, but I have the scriptures and some common sense. I'll disclose that I have a dog in this fight also. I'm an older woman with 30 plus years of believing the eternal polygamy doctrine. In those years, I struggled to trust God. Even though there's injustice in the world, God is not the author of injustice. Yet with plural marriage connected to God, it appeared to me that He was the author, and not only of an injustice, but of an eternal injustice that especially left women forever cheated. I've had more than 5 years of finally letting go of this belief and being able to see the damage this teaching causes. First, polygamy interferes with God's command to a man to cleave to his wife and his gift to a woman to desire her husband. This familiar verse, commanding a man to cleave to his wife, is found in the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Pearl of Great Price, and even the Doctrine and Covenants, that ironically houses Section 132. So our only scripture that doesn't contain this verse is the Book of Mormon. If we believe the Book of Mormon, it was given to confound false doctrines and lay down contentions. While it doesn't have this particular verse, it has other verses that make it clearer than any other scripture that this lifestyle is an abomination to God. After eating the fruit in the garden, God tells Eve in Genesis 3:16 that her desire will be to her husband. Feminist Gloria Steinem told us in the 60s that a woman without a man is like a fish without a bicycle. That may seem true sometimes, but according to the Genesis 3:16 scripture, God has given women a strong yearning to be loved and cared for by a man. Zina Diantha Huntington Jacobs Smith Young married monogamously to Henry Jacobs, then allegedly married polygamously to Joseph Smith, and later polygamously again to Brigham Young, had more than enough credentials to speak on this topic. She told a journalist that women in polygamous marriages are unhappy because they expect too much attention from the husband, and because they do not obtain it, or see a little attention bestowed upon one of the other wives, they become sullen and morose. A successful polygamous wife must regard her husband with indifference and with no other feeling than that of reverence, for love we regard as a false sentiment, a feeling which should have no existence in polygamy. Is this good advice? Should a woman believe that she emotionally needs a man as much as a fish needs a bicycle? While Zina's advice may be best for a woman to survive in a plural marriage, it reinforces that desiring has no place in polygamy. Zina says women expect too much from their husbands. But did God give women that instinctive desire to expect what Zina considers too much? To expect to be a sole wife, equally bonding and reciprocating love with their spouse. Sadly, Zina's survival tips advise women to abandon this divine desire so that they can instead successfully be a multiple wife. This lifestyle interferes with a commandment God has given a man because he cannot effectively cleave to multiple wives. It also interferes with a virtue God has given a woman because she cannot effectively desire her husband while he is ineffectively cleaving to other wives. And if you believe in some kind of eternal husband-wife relationship, what then? I think this teaching alters our understanding of this God-designed companionship into a sad expectation of a multiple partner relationship for the eternities. Second point. In plural marriage, the law of chastity is a one-sided law with an imbalance hurting the side that most needs the protection, women. The church lessons presented to me as a naive teenager in the late 60s suggested that women were the gatekeepers of sexual purity, which is why girls should dress modestly and not do anything to encourage immorality. I know unequally pinning this responsibility on girls is outdated and offensive, but stay with me. I was taught that premarital sex was a sin for both genders, but women were more apt to feel remorse and dismay as a result because they would instinctively place more value on this act. These ideas may not be true today, but it would have been true in the 1800s. The early saints lived during a period much different than ours, the Victorian era, when there was a strong religious drive everywhere for higher moral standards. Add to this era the understanding that women were the protectors of these higher standards. That was the culture. Plural marriage would have been off the radar of decency. Yet these wives often lived in the same household, to put it crudely, like prostitutes in a brothel, where they anticipated or dreaded their turn for a conjugal visit from a shared husband. The clash between their Victorian values and their reality must have been jarring. Although they were living something referred to as a form of marriage, they were sharing their husbands with other women, so unless they heeded Zena's advice, it was emotionally damaging. I believe this presents a serious inconsistency because God's laws should protect women and their unique sensitive feelings about intimacy, not break their spirits. God taught this clearly through Jacob in the Book of Mormon. He saw the sorrow and heard the mourning of the women who were enduring this lifestyle anciently. There's a reason adultery is forbidden in the Ten Commandments. Neither the man nor the woman can have multiple sexual partners during marriage without demoralizing one or both of them. As the perceived guardian of sexual morality, I suspect it would be even more disheartening for the woman. Add to this the Church's teachings of some kind of husband wife connection that will last throughout eternities, and more sorrow is added along with fuel to this fire of contradictions. The third point, the Church's guide to the Scriptures say we are born with a natural capacity to distinguish between right and wrong because of the light of Christ that is given to every person. In the historical narratives of women and men being invited to join a plural marriage relationship, there was an initial revulsion when the plural marriage principle was introduced. Even Brigham Young said he desired the grave when this doctrine was revealed to him. I wonder if his God-given conscience was warning him to run from this practice. Had he done so, it might have saved others from violating their conscience too. On the church's website, it says Lucy Walker recalled her inner turmoil when Joseph invited her to become his wife. Every feeling of my soul revolted against it, she wrote. So, at the onset, did she know this was wrong because her conscience told her so? We're taught that our conscience may be deadened through sin or misuse, so living or contemplating sin makes it easier to gradually justify what initially we were warned was sin. As the perceived gatekeeper of appropriate sexual intimacy, with the God-given instinct to desire her husband, a woman may feel an even stronger initial nudge by her conscience that this multiple wives teaching is wrong. More women seem troubled by our plural marriage doctrine than men. Perhaps this is because women are on the losing side of this equation, or maybe it's because this principle conflicts with their experiences and understanding of truth. More than one priesthood leader has been confused by a woman's concern over the possibility of eternal plural marriage. Because it's a non-issue to some men, not all, of course, they can say things that do not address the issue for a woman. Some of the common responses I've heard over the years include, "We are not asked to live it now, so just put it on a shelf and don't worry about it. You will be happy about this in the next life because God will not let you be unhappy. Not everyone will be required to live this principle." Or, this is my personal favorite, "You are selfish if you cannot share your husband to bless other women and allow them into the highest heaven." Here's some advice to the priesthood leaders. Don't use any of these responses. If you're tempted to use response 3, consider this. Assuring a woman that not everyone will be required to live it perhaps implies that she personally will not. Yet this also implies others will. In other words, a woman can be relieved this polygamy misfortune will not befall her, but will instead befall her sister neighbor. Doesn't this seem like a less than Christian perspective that cannot engender faith in the justice of God's eternal plan? If you're tempted to use response 4 and question the selfishness of a woman who doubts this doctrine, please remember, it's not women, but it's the Holy One of Israel who is the keeper of the gate to get us back to God. Women aren't being selfish if they don't want to share their husband now or in the next life. They're following their innate God-given desire. If women have a divine desire towards their husbands, a guarded view of intimacy, and a conscience warning them that this many wives doctrine conflicts with God's laws, trust me, there's no excuse you can provide that solves these inconsistencies. The contradictions with this doctrine abound. It's time to rescind the plural marriage teaching.